So Oregon's still waiting on a couple of decisions via the Diego Pavia Rule. How much do they need a guy like Jamaree Caldwell?
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with your Oregon Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College to get $20 off your first purchase. How can Oregon's defense improve? Getting a couple of key returners could be a good thing, depending on who you're talking about, and the future at the defensive back position, which could, in the short term, include Kobe Savage. On the defensive line, it could include Jamaree Caldwell. Let's start with a second guy there. I'd be super down to have Caldwell back. Now, the way he could return is that because of his previous time spent at a junior college, he has the ability to take advantage of the old Diego Pavia rule. Diego Pavia, of course, father of the state of Alabama. Not actually, but like kind of, at least a little bit. And anyone who had their eligibility expiring in the 24-25 season because of prior JUCO years spent that have counted towards their eligibility in the NCAA have been granted the 2025-26 athletic season to return. But we haven't heard yet about whether Caldwell or Kobe Savage at safety, both of whom were starters for Oregon's defense this year, would come back. I would be 100% down to bring back Jamaree Caldwell. This is not a guy whose numbers popped off the page this season. He did have the pass deflection that led to Mateo Uiagalelei's game-winning interception against Wisconsin, but he had 4.5 tackles for loss, did not register a sack. His impact went far beyond that. Interior defensive line, guys, it is tough to rack up stats. When you see a guy like Derek Harmon doing it, that's a first-round pick. Caldwell isn't that sort of guy, but he's certainly someone that fits the bill as an NFL defensive lineman, but he doesn't have the NFL draft profile that Derek Harmon does. So he's still probably waiting around, figuring out, do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? Can we even come back? Because there are eligibility requirements that also factor in to whether or not you can be applicable for this waiver, essentially, to get another year of college football. But if Caldwell were to return, you would be bringing back a guy who, according to Pro Football Focus, was one of the 50 highest graded interior defensive linemen in the country. That is not a small feat to obtain. Harmon, by the way, was inside the top 25 for most of the season, but Caldwell was at about 46, and he had a grade just over 80, which is really hard to obtain. And that matches what I saw with him all year. He is an incredibly disruptive guy. He can swallow up double teams. He can get into the backfield. He can make plays. He's not a huge pass rusher. That's something I think that Amari Washington at defensive tackle is better at, something Derek Harmon was better at. But against the run, and just kind of generally speaking, I thought Caldwell was really good. So if he were able to come back, I'd be very down. I think it would be a big benefit to Oregon's defense. If he doesn't, then that calls upon a group of younger guys. Now remember, they brought in Bear Alexander via the transfer portal as well. Generally, transfers come in, especially experienced ones, to start right away. That's not always the case, hasn't always been the case with the transfers that Dan Lanning has brought in on either side of the ball at Oregon over the last couple of seasons. You think about a guy like Sione Laulea, who only saw the field in garbage time or special teams a season ago, and he was the number one JUCO corner coming out in that recruiting class. So I think Caldwell would be right back into the starting rotation, and it'd probably, I would think, be him and Amari Washington, or maybe him and Bear Alexander, and then they'd let a group of young guys battle it out for the fourth defensive lineman spot on the interior. But if not, if Caldwell's not able to return, or if he decides to go to the NFL draft, then you would be looking at a group of young guys who would then have to step up in a significant way. Because Washington, I think he is one of those guys, there are not very many with all the turnover on Oregon's defense. He's one of those guys I think you can Sharpie in as a starter for Oregon come this fall. Regardless of whether Caldwell comes back, I think he's a better player than Bear Alexander. And if Caldwell doesn't return, then maybe Alexander is your starter with Washington. But I'll declare myself in charge of the Amari Washington fan club here on Locked On Ducks. I think I have the authority to do that. But if I don't, I'm doing it anyway. So the Locked On Ducks Supreme Court can rule whether or not that's constitutional. However, in the meantime, if you don't get Caldwell back, you're looking at some collection of Jericho Johnson, Tioni Gray, Zadavian Sims, Aiden Breland, all guys on the interior from the last couple of cycles that'll be going into, by the way, Terrence Green also in that fold. He's seen the most action of those guys, the most snaps over the last couple of years. It's all very limited. It's less than 50, but he's still seen the most action, which was a precursor to Amari Washington having a bit of a breakout season this year. I think he really breaks out in 2025. But those would be the guys who you turn to and say, you've now got to fill up the depth chart, because you can't just have two good interior defensive linemen. I thought Oregon had 3, oftentimes 4 this season, but I thought their top 3 guys, Harmon, Caldwell, Washington, were really, really good. But somebody in that young batch would then have to step up even more so. Whereas if Caldwell's able to return, you just need one of those guys to really make themselves into a quality rotation caliber player in their second or third season of college football. And in the trenches, that's the position that tends to take the most development. So that's the first guy you look at. The other guy is probably not the most popular amongst Oregon fans right now, and that's Kobe Savage. And I have been critical, I believe fairly so, of Oregon safeties. They were my biggest concern going into the Rose Bowl. Ohio State picked on him quite a bit, but Savage is a guy that played this year for Oregon, wasn't bad all year. It's not as if Oregon's defense, which I'll talk about more in the second segment, was bad all season long. It's just that in a couple of key spots, it became clear there is another level of production Oregon can get out of the safety room. And so bringing back a guy like Kobe Savage, you've brought in Dylan Thieneman from Purdue. There are other guys in that room, maybe a young guy like Trey McNutt or Aaron Flowers or Peyton Woodyard or Kingston Lopa who could suddenly become that safety. But if Kobe Savage gets another year and wants to come back to Oregon, there's not zero precedent for the staff taking a returning starter and essentially relegating him to a bench role. It's just not super common. But I know there are going to be plenty of fans out there that hear this and go, Matt, I don't want to see Kobe Savage out there playing safety again for the Ducks. And I get it. I get it. He did not have a good day, nor did Tysheem Johnson against Ohio State. Each of the last 2 years, when Oregon has gone up against NFL caliber wideouts, 3 of them to be exact, safeties have struggled. So I understand the desire for fresh blood, but if the guys that are there that you want to be better are not actually better, the staff is not going to go in that direction. See Ty Thompson. You wanted to see what Oregon had because Anthony Brown was struggling, but the staff knew, this is not actually going to be better. It looks better on paper because this guy's got a bunch of stars next to his name, but that doesn't mean that he's actually ready to play. So those are the 2 roster moves that we're still waiting on. There's Emmanuel Pregnon, the potential USC transfer on the interior of the offensive line. I think Texas has been going after him. That's another move that we could see sometime this week or next. But those 2 guys were both starters this year, and it is hard sometimes for coaching staffs to move on. Even if we from the outside think they should, they'll probably lean towards a returner more than anything else. So let me know your thoughts below in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter with thoughts on Caldwell and Savage. But the defense was really good this year, right until it wasn't. How does that get fixed? Is it just personnel based? Well, in some respects, yes, but it is not all on the players. If you try to get tickets with someplace other than Game Time, that is entirely on you, because we've got this new 12-team playoff, so there will be more college football postseason games to go to. And if you want to go to them in the future or go to the national championship game between Ohio State and Notre Dame, Game Time is the place to go. Game Time has got Game Time picks, which makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Do you want it to be harder? Of course not. Of course not. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I've used Game Time myself. It is incredibly simple for someone who's not technologically, shall we say, adept, such as like me, and it is just a great way to get tickets to whatever you want to buy, whatever you want to go to. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Got a bunch of great mailbag questions rolling in. Submit yours in the YouTube comments below, or hit me up on Twitter, or become a Locked On Ducks insider. That works as well. Link is in the description below. This one came in from ZelfFS, whatever that means. It works. What's your thoughts on our defense? I listened to this other guy that made a good point. People not named me are not allowed to give good points on the Ducks. Obviously, it's me or it's nobody. That's heavy sarcasm, just so we're clear. In every big game, Washington times 2, Ohio State times 2, Penn State, Georgia, first Oregon State game, etc., our defense has given up tons of total yards and points. Also, seems like our rush defense hasn't been all that good. Do we need to find someone else for our defensive coordinator? Tosh is good, but is he elite? So I thought of this as, does Oregon just need better players? Is that all that it is? Because it's hard to argue with every point you made here. You didn't even bring up Boise State, who was one of the best teams that Oregon played this year. 34 points. Now, that wasn't necessarily all on the defense, but a good chunk of it was. I mean, the defense didn't fumble to give Boise State the ball inside their Oregon 20, 25-yard line, but they gave up a touchdown instead of being able to hold to a field goal. But that's kind of nitpicking. On the whole, 34 points, not as many as you would like to see. So I don't think that this is as simple as Oregon just needs to get better talent. Because right now, there is plenty of frustration amongst Oregon fans about the secondary, and they got to be better, and they got to be taller, and all these sorts of things. And certainly, Oregon's secondary is undersized compared to some of the players that they've recruited and the way that it might look one day. Another subject we'll touch on later on today's show. But I don't look at Oregon's defense at any position group and say that talent is the biggest thing that they were missing, that's all they need. If they just had better players, once the recruits really get fully incorporated from these 24 and 25 recruiting classes, then Oregon's defense will take off. Let's make something very clear. Oregon had a great defense this year. Can it improve? Obviously. Because I look at Ohio State's defense, I look at Notre Dame's defense, and I think they're better than what Oregon has. Is there a talent difference? At some spots, yes. Notre Dame and Ohio State has significantly higher impact safeties than Oregon. 100%. Oregon has 2 first-round picks and another second, third, maybe fourth-round pick along the defensive line in this locker room. Well, or I guess they had those guys. Mateo, Birch, Harmon. Harmon's going to be a first-round pick. Mateo might be a top 10 pick come the 2026 NFL draft. And Birch is going to get taken by somebody because he's a physical freak. That is on par with what Ohio State and Notre Dame have put on the defensive line this year, who both have great defensive lines. But Oregon's defensive line has been a menace. And if your reaction is to just look at the Ohio State game and say, well, they didn't generate enough pressure on Will Howard, that's true. Will Howard also wasn't holding the ball very long because schematically, Oregon was outflanked in that game. They were outcoached, and that neutralized some of their most talented guys. The way that Ohio State got rid of the ball, when they called this play, when they called that play, because Ohio State's defensive line, we all agree that that's good, right? I watched them have a minimal impact on a certain game played at Autzen Stadium on October 12th. 0 sacks. 0 sacks in that game. Were they not any good? Do they not have the talent? No. Some days you just go against a great unit that's playing well, and the scheme matters a lot more than a lot of people realize. So I look at Oregon's defense and say there are areas where they can improve, where they can be better, but the talent is not the biggest thing holding Oregon's defense back. So in these big games, the biggest thing that I have seen from Oregon's defense is that the coaching staff has not put the guys in the right situations to succeed. Now, that doesn't mean it's always their fault. This is a blended problem. I mean, when Ashton Jeanty broke that one-play touchdown run after the Patrick Herbert fumble, it felt like Oregon was actually starting to build momentum and was driving down to have a 2-possession lead. All of a sudden, Herbert fumbles and then a one-play touchdown, and Boise State has tied the game. Yeah, there were bad run fits there. Do you blame that on the players, or do you blame that on the coaches? I mean, there's one school of thought, you're either coaching it or allowing it to happen. There's the other school of thought, you can only prepare guys to do so much. And based on what we saw from Oregon's secondary in terms of tackling for the rest of the season, I thought Nico Reed was really good. I thought Brandon Johnson was solid. I thought everybody else just okay at times in the open field, or taking down running backs at times like Ashton Jeanty. So that's a combination of those two. Like, everyone has to be better collectively. I don't think it's all on Tosh, and I don't think it's all on just a couple of players on the defensive side of the ball. Everyone's got to be better. But to say that the coaching staff has no ability to improve and therefore changes should be made, yeah, I don't share that particular belief. The fire this coach or fire that coach or coordinator, who else, or I'm not in that camp, because this is a coaching staff that in several ways you can point to their 3 seasons and say they got better from year 1 to year 2 and year 2 to year 3. I felt like they really upped the talent level from year 1 to year 2, did so in year 2 to year 3, but then the scheme and approach and the details got a lot better because the numbers got a lot better. That's what I'm going off. Is you're allowing less than 20 points a game, you're doing something right. But with the way Oregon recruits, yeah, the ceiling is higher. The ceiling is what you see Ohio State doing this year. That's the best Oregon can become on either side of the ball, which is to say they're capable, if everything goes according to plan, of building a roster that's the best, or a team that is the best in all of college football. They had one of the best this year. They just happened to have a really bad day. So that's the first part. Second part of this is, in big games, when you are going against the best teams in college football, you are not always going to perform the way you do over the course of the season. That applies to literally anybody. Ohio State's defense was great. They gave up 32 points to Oregon too. Why did that happen? Because Oregon had a great game plan, a bunch of good players, and they executed really well. That's how high-level college football matchups can play out. And I know that Tosh just had a really bad day against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. It happens even with great coaches or great coordinators. I just watched earlier tonight Kevin O'Connell, who I think is a great coach. I just watched him get punked by Sean McVay. Absolutely clown, taken behind the woodshed and beaten with a 2x4. From the moment the game began, the Rams were significantly better. Vikings had the better regular season. Is Kevin O'Connell not a good coach? He put up 9 points in that game. Is he not a good offensive coordinator? Does he not have a feel for it? Or alternatively, is this how football goes sometimes? It is. Now, as for a theme in Oregon's exploitable defense at times, I think the biggest area where the personnel can be upgraded is at the safety spot. I 100% believe that. I was watching Ohio State play against Texas, and that was the biggest thing that stood out. Heck, I watched Notre Dame this year, and you'll see them in the national championship game. And the number one thing that stands out that I feel like Oregon is missing is the elite safety play. But I don't feel like the linebackers are at a significant disadvantage. I don't think there's a huge gap in defensive line talent. And I think Oregon's corners were actually pretty darn good this year. When you look at the way Ohio State moved the ball down the field, they weren't picking on the corners who were not getting beat when they did throw the ball that way. They weren't getting burned. They weren't getting absolutely worked or having coverage busts. I thought Nico Reed and Jabbar Muhammad were good this year. Sure, they could be great. They weren't Christian Gonzalez level. So yeah, you can take another step forward there. But the one area was the weakness that I saw going into the Rose Bowl and that Ohio State took advantage of. Yeah, the safeties have to be better, but guess what? The coaches have to be better. I mean, something about why was there a blown coverage on Jeremiah Smith? How does that ever happen? Texas came out and had a brilliant game plan where they were bracketing, doubling him the whole game, and it threw Ohio State off of their rhythm. Those are the sorts of things. Maybe Oregon didn't feel like that was the right approach. Maybe they trusted their guys too much in coverage. Maybe they didn't feel like their guys could execute that game plan. I don't know. We're never going to know that answer. But what we do know, based on watching the other teams in college football who have played Ohio State and played them tough, the Michigan game is just a disastrous coaching effort. Again, great example. Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, great coaches, really good. Horrible day against Michigan. Horrible day. That would be our lasting impression of Ohio State if the playoff hadn't expanded this year. So I don't think that the coaching staff needs to make huge changes. They do need to consistently be in improvement mode. And that's what I've seen from them over the last couple of years. Yes, some personnel can be better, but sometimes you just got to look at the coaches and say they need to be better. And you do a little bit of both, and you can get better outcomes on the field. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, let me know. I'll try and answer it again. How bright is the future of the Oregon defensive backs? It's a subject of conversation that we are going to have on this very episode today. Before we wrap up today's show, this episode is brought to you by Wayfair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get into my routine once again if I've strayed away from it during the holidays. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything that you need. And it's all within your budget as well. That's the way that Wayfair rolls. So if you're looking for furniture, they've got a huge selection and makes it easy to find pieces that fit your style and your budget. And the best part, they have got free and hassle-free delivery even for the larger items. Wayfair's site is really easy to navigate, and you'll find everything that you need in no time. There's something for every style and every home. Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. All right, because we haven't talked enough about the secondary today, let's go to Zaheem's question. Then we'll end with a fun question to wrap up today's show. I'm honestly most excited about that one, especially for my nerdy fans out there. I know I have a few of you. I don't know how many, but we'll find out. So Zaheem sends in this question. Mailbag. A very hypothetical question at that. Indeed it is. If Dorian Brew, Brandon Finney, Trey McNutt, and Naeem Offord are Oregon's 4 starting defensive backs in 2027, oh boy, does Oregon have the best defensive backfield in the country? Feels like they certainly could. Well, we're not just talking this fall or the following fall. We're looking at the fall after that. And frankly, I appreciate where your head is at, because 4 guys that are coming in this 2025 recruiting class for the Ducks, every single guy that he mentioned there is a high 4 or 5-star guy in this incoming class. The season where they could all be gelling and playing their best football and having been fully integrated to the college football world, it could be 2027. Maybe it's 2026. Maybe a couple of them are impact guys in 2025. I can't say that they could be the best secondary in the country because, number one, I don't know what everyone else has other than the abstract view of these guys are mega talented. They are not the only players that are mega talented, and not every huge DB prospect has gone to Oregon. It's the best DB recruiting haul Oregon has ever had in a single class. No doubt about it. However, they're reaching... Those guys reaching their full potential, English is dumb. Those guys reaching their full potential is dependent on them, first of all. They've got to be willing to put in the work. But number 2, back to the conversation I was just having with you guys, it's got to come down to the coaching staff as well. They have to be able to develop those guys. Think about Dante Manning, who I believe, someone can fact check me on this, but I'm pretty sure Dante Manning is the first 5-star defensive back that Oregon had ever signed. Part of that 2020 recruiting class with Noah Sewell and Justin Flo. And Flo, of course, never got fully healthy and just kind of threw everything off. Sewell was great. I will forever be a Noah Sewell defender. And Dante Manning just finished his last season with the Ducks. If that's someone who had reached his full potential, he has elite physical traits. He blitzed as much as any Oregon corner because he was the fastest. He was clearly the fastest. So that's a guy who came in with all the talent in the world, just like Finney or Offord or Dorian Brew or Trey McNutt or any of these guys. All the physical traits in the world. But why wasn't Dante Manning a 3-and-done guy? Why wasn't he 3 years with the Ducks and went to the NFL? Because for whatever reason, you can put it on the coaching staff, you can put it on him, you can put him on both, but we saw it very clearly. Manning had a solid season this year. His PFF grade was right around 70. I think that was the highest of his career. He did some solid things, but he never became the elite cornerback prospect because he didn't develop into it. So the idea that every single one of these guys is going to reach their full potential, statistically, it's not true. Even when you're recruiting guys of that caliber, but you want to keep bringing them in to give yourself a greater probability of finding the guy who is able to put it together, who is able to take his physical traits and turn himself into a high-end player in college football. That's why high school recruiting still matters, and you can't just rely on the portal. And I am more than a little intrigued to see how Oregon's defensive backfield shakes out for 2025, because you've got a lot of names, you've got a lot of options, but I look at this group and I am excited about what they can become. I don't expect it to all click in 2025, and I don't expect them all to hit. But right now, can you say based on film study which guy is going to be able to make it work and which guy won't? No, you can't. You can't. That's how we keep the off-season content rolling. Okay, so fun question to end today's show. I'm always here for a fun question like this, particularly in the off-season. And this came from Sir XXV5498, who asked me for a review of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Oh. This could not just be its own podcast. This could be a 1-hour monologue where I don't even stop for second segment sips. I despise the Star Wars sequel trilogy for so many reasons. The writing is inconsistent. The character development is wildly poor. The cinematography is beautiful, but they take those amazing, stunning visuals and they just waste them with nonsensical script writing and plot development. I mean, Rey being... oh, I can't even say it, man. The Rise of Skywalker ending with Rey saying, "I'm Rey Skywalker," when she was somehow a Palpatine, which was never alluded to at any point in time in the sequel or original trilogy, or sorry, the prequel or original trilogy. I mean, come on. The entire scene on Canto Bight in The Last Jedi, a disaster. The throne room scene in The Last Jedi is awesome, but that whole scene, the movie, complete and total mess. They took Han Solo and Leia, who everybody grew up with and loved, and made them into a divorced couple, who one of whom then dies. What? Why? Just for so many reasons. Why? You turn Luke Skywalker, the hero of everything, into this loser this outcast guy who wants no part of helping anyone anywhere. I mean, there were so many missteps. It started out great. Like the opening scene to The Force Awakens is actually really good. The first 20 minutes of that movie are really good, and then everything goes haywire from there. So I'm going to cut the Star Wars chatter from there because I know this is a Locked On Ducks show, but you do not have to beg to get my thoughts on Star Wars, Marvel, DC, anything like that. Always happy to share. So Yeah, I actually have a friend who I've convinced to watch Star Wars for the first time. Am not going to encourage this friend to watch the sequels. I'm actually saying don't watch them because I don't want those to be a part of Star Wars, quite frankly. So, all right, we're done for the day. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And yes, this is an Oregon show, so go Ducks.